glad you are on the podcast. I know it's kind of weird, but it's that whole like following people on social media and their work and seeing the interconnecting connections and then meeting them and you're like, hey, I've been following your work for a long time. So I've been following your work. So welcome to the
Yeah,
podcast. And
same.
tell us the Beth Tyson story.
Well, thank you for having me. I agree that I've also been following you and just seeing all the great work that you're doing. So it's nice to virtually connect and get to know each other better tonight. So my story is, whew, I guess I give you the short story, but let's see. After I got my master's in counseling, or actually before my master's in counseling, I was working in finance and in banking and administrative work. And my mom passed away suddenly when I was 26, and that was my first real experience with trauma. And it was that experience that really woke me up in a way to realize that it was time to not waste any more of my life doing something that really didn't mean much to me, and to really pursue something meaningful and purposeful, because you just never know how long you're going to be here. And it was a kind of a wake up call for me. So I got my master's in counseling after doing some soul searching and everything. And when I graduated, my first role out of graduate school was as a foster kinship and adoptive in-home trauma therapist for children who are about to be removed from their homes, and into alternative locations. And I was kind of the person who was supposed to keep things together. And I was like that last ditch effort of, okay, um, this family's about to be split up and have a child removed, and what can we do to keep them together? Now, of course, that's a reactive stance, right? Not a preventative stance. And coming in late in the game with therapy is never the best route. Nonetheless, I had a lot of success in those roles, and I really enjoyed the families and seeing how strong they were, and the love between them, even though there were misunderstandings and behavioral challenges and all kinds of stuff. The love that was there for these children, was what really stood out to me, and I really enjoyed working with them. So that was what brought me into the child welfare space and really wanting to work with families and children with trauma. And then from there, I started my own family, and I have a daughter who's 6, and really, really wanted to understand how to parent her in the best way possible. So I've spent the last couple of years really researching, parenting skills and strategies, and trust-based and respectful parenting, conscious parenting, responsive parenting. So all of that really falls in line with trauma-informed parenting. It's very similar, and so what I realize is that that's just what we need to do for all children, right? Trauma informed parenting is not just for those with trauma. It really is, in my opinion, what we all children need. So I started doing during the pandemic. I Right before the pandemic, I published a children's book that was inspired by my work with kinship families, and were also known as grand families, grandparents who are raising, or yeah, grandparents who are raising grandchildren. And it's a huge population in our country that is often unrecognized and isolated. And I wanted to write a children's book so that these families could see themselves in these stories and have a representation, that they can connect with and not feel so alone in the world. So we have about 2.8 million recognized grand families in the United States, and we know there's many, many more because those are only the ones that are accounted for with the child welfare system. And sometimes this happens; these relationships form informally, and it's just that mom. Can't handle the kids. Maybe it's drug abuse, maybe it's mental health issues, and the kids are dropped off with grandma, and mom kind of doesn't come back for a long time. And those situations, it's not documented. Nobody knows that's happening. So we know we have 2.8, and we know there's much more than that. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me. And from since the pandemic started, I became a childhood trauma consultant instead of a therapist. I really loved doing the therapy, but I found that as a mom to a young child, it was a little too much, too heavy, to be absorbing a lot of that vicarious trauma from the children and families I was working with. So I wanted to still be involved and be an advocate and share the information that was all up here that everybody needed, but not have the intense absorption of all that vicarious trauma. So I started a consultancy business called Beth Tyson Trauma Consulting, and now I'm working with several organizations to guide them in trauma informed projects, as well as doing speaking events, keynote speeches, and training nationally and international training on trauma and childhood adversity, and writing a blog and all kinds of things. So I could go on, but I think
Isn't that
that's
how it works,
enough.
though? I mean, we can't just do one thing. We got to do it
You
all,
gotta
right?
do it
And
all, right?
I feel that a lot. And there's a lot of what you said that really resonated with me. And I think one of the big is that this is just good parenting, right?
Yeah.
And it's being a good educator. Like these practices aren't specifically only for children who have trauma. I just spoke to a school this morning and I went through misconceptions of trauma informed education. And one of the misconceptions I talk about is you need to know a child's A score, that you don't need that. Like that's unnecessary information. And then also that the teacher needs to understand the trauma that has happened to a kid to be able to intervene. That
Mm-mm.
isn't true. We know these aren't true, right? It's just simply humanizing what we do and
Yeah.
seeing each other as human, whether you're 5 or whether you're 50.
Right.
And I think that's powerful. And when I spoke to you the other day, Beth, I told you like I can handle 325 other people's kids in this way. And my own child, like I really have to work to push the pause button,
Hmm.
to validate emotions and feelings because he's very spirited. I don't know where he gets it. He's quite a little disruptor when he feels like things have been wrong. Don't know where he gets it, but it's
Mm,
such an important piece. And I think let's dig into that. How do you
yeah.
see what do you see the role of trauma informed parenting, right? And I heard your background and I heard what you've done for other family, but I heard something even more important. You were internalizing this as an individual parent. Like,
Hmm.
yes, I helped other people, but I have to do this work. So how do you see or what do you see the role of trauma informed parenting being?
Yeah. Well, first I want to touch on what you said about like when it's other people and it's the outside world and it's people that aren't in your life every day. It's much easier to help and be a support and be there and be a guide. But with my own child, all of my trauma is triggered, right? So, and this was something I didn't know until a couple years ago, but in the middle of being a young mom, to a young child, I really had no idea that her behavior was going to set me off in an emotional way that really had nothing to do with her. She's a kid being a kid, right? She's not trying to hurt me. She's not trying to upset me. This is just normal developmental child behavior, and but I'm feeling all these strong emotions, and I really had to ask myself why. Why does the crying bother me so much? Why does it cut me to my core? Why can't I tolerate it for more than a few minutes before losing my temper? What I really needed to understand that so that I could stay calm in those moments, because it can be real easy to just blame your frustration on the child and just say, this he's doing it on purpose, she's doing it on purpose, she pushing my buttons on purpose. And it's like, no, they're really not. They're just kids reacting to their environment most of the time. And it's my old stuff is coming up, when maybe I know for a fact that crying, and when I was a child in our generation when we were young, you crying got squashed real fast. Like, don't cry, you're fine, you're okay, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, what are you crying for? Like a lot of shaming around crying. And so when my daughter cries, all of that stuff bubbles up to the top, and it makes it really hard for me to stay present and calm with that, and I have to work at it. And so I think, like, we have to give ourselves some grace as parents, that and acknowledge that our reactions often have nothing to do necessarily with the child's behavior. It could have to do with something that is coming from our old hurts and pains from childhood.
Well,
And
interesting enough, I think that applies to educators too.
oh
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it's in matter of fact, today when I was talking to the school, I said you have to know what activates you.
Mhm.
You have to know your pet peeves because kids will figure it out. I was the kid that could figure out the pet peeve of the teacher, right?
Yeah.
And kids know, we have to know what to do. We have to know how to handle those things, right?
Mhm.
It's not that kids are purposefully doing it, right? But they're seeking control, they're seeking safety, they're wanting to make sure they're in control of situations. There's so many reasons why I say control, but it's safety. It's not control like I want to be in power, but I want to
Right.
know what's going to happen next and be able to predict that. There's
Yeah.
so many reasons why that happens. And I go, Beth, to even thinking about educators' interactions with parents, right?
Mhm.
Because for some reason, and Jim Sporleader on this podcast, I asked him, what's one thing you wish you would have done differently? And he said, I wish I would have extended the same amount of grace to the parents that I did my students.
Mm.
And I've thought about that. And it drove me as a principal that when we're operating with parents, the same idea that we do not want to do with kids, which is shame, judgment, blame, all of that,
Yeah.
we don't want to operate with that lens with parents. We want to still operate in that I'm going to pause, I'm going to seek first to understand, then to be understood, listen with my heart, listen with my ears, listen to all of it, then get down to what's happening. When I started doing that with parents, it changed my relationship with the parents at school. And I
Yeah.
also learned that when I connected to them, not as a principal, but as a fellow parent,
Yeah.
when I would say what I just said to you, 325 other kids, I got it. My own, I don't know some days. They'll look at me like, really? You're a principal? Yeah, it's not the same,
It's
right?
not. It's not. They will bring things out of you that you didn't even know was there.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, you have something that you refer to as trust-focused parenting, right?
Mhm.
And I think that just the words itself, it makes me go, dang, like, yes, trust focused. They're so, especially with everything that's happening in the world continuously, always, and forever will be. That tell me what that means, trust focused parenting.
Yeah, so trust focused parenting is something that I've developed in theory over the last couple of years. Basically, what it is it's combining the trauma informed with just with all the conscious, respectful parenting stuff that's out there now, with the trauma informed stuff. And what the basis of it is making sure that the foundation of trust between you and the child is always your number one priority. And there are things that parents and teachers and caregivers and grandparents and aunts and uncles do unintentionally and unknowingly a lot of times to break trust with their children, that they're caring for. And I try to teach people how to see those blind spots, and try to not break that trust and build trust instead. And so I teach people skills for building trust with their children. And I also teach them about what not to do to break the trust. Because what we know from trauma and loss is that the child's foundation of trust has been shattered, and we need to help them put it back together. And we can only do that if they feel safe and if they feel as though they can trust that the person who cares for them most and is closest to them is going to be consistent and keep their word and honest and compassionate and caring. And there are things that we can sometimes do as parents, again unintentionally, that breaks trust. But if you focus on that, that's the foundation to me. That's the root. If you can focus on building trust, you increase the amount of safety and security within the relationship, and that attachment relationship continues to build. And the more we know from all the research that, with with developmental trauma, um, that the trust is really broken there. Maybe the parent, their biological parent, was abusive, or maybe somebody else hurt them physically, or maybe they were shamed and yelled at and screamed at and they feel unsafe. So now you're the caregiver for this child. Your number one priority needs to be reestablishing their sense of trust and safety. And there are things you can do to make that an easier process.
Well, and
um,
I think too, it takes time,
oh
especially
yeah.
when we're talking, especially in the realm of foster youth and building capacity and building trust and all of that. It just takes time. And
Time.
the reason I say that is most listeners probably already know I served as a foster parent for nearly 2 years, and it took so long. It took so much time, right? And and but it was authentic. It was real.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like when I say this is how I'm going to be. I'm going to be. I'm not going to yell.
Yeah.
It scares kids when they're used to that's how you're going to respond. Is I'm used to being yelled at. Like
Hmm.
some kids don't know how to take that, and it's
Yeah.
interesting how that processing happens. Now, did I yell? Yes. Do I even yell now sometimes at my child? Unfortunately, yes. And the reason I say that is because parent shaming is a real thing. And
Yeah.
people think that every house looks like the old 60s or 70s shows, the Cleavers and whatever the Leave It to Beaver. It doesn't exist, right? That doesn't
No.
exist in the real world. That we
No.
make mistakes, we say things we might not be able to, and what somebody just said, one of our Facebook users, we are human,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But I think what I found is simply telling my child that, man, I made a mistake.
Hmm.
It happened yesterday.
Yep.
He was supposed to go to track practice. I called him. I'm like, hey, where are you? He's like, I'm on the bus. I'm like, what are you on the bus for? You're supposed to be track practice. Mom told you, blah, blah, blah. It's canceled. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. You're supposed to be on the bus. I apologize. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's that process. And so you have you have this trust focused parenting, but you also have something called the CARES model.
Yes.
And I have no idea what that is because you haven't told me, right? But I want to know what it is. What is the CARES model? And you're even going to give listeners the opportunity to get free access to this CARES model. So tell what it is, and then we'll tell them how they can get to the model.
Yes. So basically, the CARES model is something I developed. It's an acronym. Each letter, stands for something, a different word. And what it is a framework for co-regulation in the heat of the moment when a child who has a history of trauma is having a meltdown, having a tantrum, having those big emotions because they're triggered. This is a step-by-step model for you to walk yourself through. And it's easy to remember because it's cares, and you're caring and you're trying to be careful not to do more harm, right? So you can memorize the words and kind of go through it. And you do the C, the A, the R, the E, the S, and when you do that, you help the child to bring their nervous system into a state of regulation instead of dysregulation. And a lot of the cares model is about connecting. First, making sure you have consent. That's what the C stands for. Never, as a teacher, this is important, or any type of caregiver. If you're working with children and you suspect that they have trauma, but really for any child, again, it's not just for kids with trauma. This is just respectful to any child. Make sure they want you in their space right now. Very simple question. I can see you're upset. Validate the feelings. I can see you're upset. Would
Mm-hmm.
you like me to come closer to you, or do you need some space right now? That very simple little thing may sound insignificant, but that builds trust with someone. That shows a child that you care about how they're feeling, so much so that you're going to ask their permission to come close or to stay away. You're going to try to meet their need in that way. Very powerful, especially for a child whose boundaries and physical boundaries have been crossed many, many times. It's our instinct to want to go up and hug or touch or put a hand on somebody. Unfortunately, you just don't know if possibly you look like, sound like, smell like the person who has harmed them, and you put your hand on that child, and they go into complete freak out mode. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so you really just asking that question. Would you like me to come closer, or do you need some space right now? Even with your own child, sometimes my daughter, she didn't want to be around me when she's having a tantrum. She needs to go off in her room and like have some space from all of us. So but then there's other moments where she does. So when you ask the question, you leave room for that, and you respect the child and their body and their autonomy.
Well,
So
and
that's
I
just a
think
little snippet.
that that resonates so deeply because as a principal, I use that kids don't want to talk either. A lot of kids don't want to talk. Some kids do. Some kids will tell you what they're thinking,
Yeah.
how they're thinking it, where they want you to go, and how fast you want to get there. Right? They're very out. They're just verbal. There's a lot of kids that go into that. I'm not saying anything. Matter of fact, I had a lot of students who
Yeah.
would go to the I'm not saying anything, and I
Mhm.
learned the thumbs up, thumbs down, and I would ask those questions. Hey, do you want me to come sit by you? If you do, give me thumbs up. If they give me thumbs down, I would say, hey, I'm going to sit over here. And whenever you're ready, because you look like you may need some space, I'm going to sit over here. Whenever you're ready, you can either give me thumbs up or you can come over here. You can ask me to come next to you. That in itself,
Yeah.
and I what I found is sometimes it would take 2, 3, maybe 4 minutes max, but not much longer than that. Or I would say, hey, do you want me to breathe with you so we can? Because I'm feeling kind of out of
Yeah.
sorts. Can I
Yeah.
breathe with you? And we'll do 5. We had all kinds of breathing strategies.
Yeah.
But it's a powerful tool that
Yeah.
for some reason I've heard this. We don't have time.
Mm.
Teachers, we don't have time.
Mm.
Really? Mm. Well, then what do we have time for? Like, what are we using the time for? Right?
Yeah.
Because there's such a pressure of academics, 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 and it's interesting because when I became a principal and we started this work, I found it interesting that my school counselor, who I refer to as Yoda because she is the keeper of all knowledge, she actually is a licensed therapist and she's just amazing. Um, but she was like, Portel, you have to stand in front of the staff and tell them you're giving them the green light to do what we just said, like stop in the middle of teaching and connect to a child. And I'm like, are you
Yeah.
serious? Like I've said it. She's like, no, 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 you implied it. You've never actually just said it. Like you're giving them the green light to do this in the midst of a formal observation or informal feedback or whenever the superintendent walks in, you're giving them the green light.
Mm.
That was a game changer.
Yeah.
Game changer for the teachers.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I made a face when you said they say they don't have time, but I that's real. I think that they really do
Yeah.
feel that much pressure. I mean, teachers are incredibly under so much pressure academically for the academic stuff and then the behavioral stuff. I mean, they're really going through it, right, especially now. So I didn't mean any disrespect by that face. I just like meant like that's a really hard spot to be in, you know?
It is, and it's the system that's been created for us, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
We have college and career readiness. We don't have kids who have great well-being.
Yeah.
Well-being is not even a standard. It's not even something that education and academics even focus on. Matter of fact, to be quite honest, Beth, that we have states like mine who are trying to ban words like social and emotional learning. I mean, that's how absurd it has become for educators, is
Yeah.
that we're trying to look at the well-being of our kids and teach strategies and do this. And there are actually laws being passed saying you can't talk about social and emotional learning. You can't talk about mental health. You can't talk about de-escalation strategies because if you talk about it, kids will then figure it all out.
Oh, it's frustrating. That stuff to me really gets me fired up because there is no learning that happens if a child is upset or dysregulated or worried about where they're sleeping tonight or worried about what mom is coming back. There's just no learning that's going to take place. No, I mean there might be some, but we're not doing what we need to do. It's the foundation, our mental health. For some reason, we've made the most important organ in our brain or in our body the lowest priority. Our brains are the most important, valuable thing we have in our body. And if we don't have mental health, we don't have intellectual health, we don't have spiritual health, we don't have physical health, we can't learn properly, we can't process, we can't absorb information, that our children's mental health is the foundation of their success. And if school is about creating successful adults or young adults, mental health has to be a part of that. We need to
Mhm.
teach them how to cope with their feelings. We need to teach them about their brain and the neuroscience of their brain. And we need to teach them how to engage in healthy relationships.
I agree
Yeah.
100%. And here, I'm going to give you an example. And I know you talked about in the opening the loss of your mom. My
Mhm.
mom passed away on April 10th of 2021. I was a
Ah,
principal. We were still in the midst of the throes of the pandemic as trying to lead a school and all of the mandates and everything. I didn't go to school for a couple weeks.
I'm sure. I'm sorry
And
to hear
so
that.
we say that about our kids, right? But as adults, we're the same way. There's certain times when things happen or things arise or events occur that we can't do all of the things that we want our kids to do,
Yeah.
right? And yet this idea of achieve, 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 college, career ready, right? It also goes down. I'm going to go on a little bit tangent, Beth. So just prepare yourself,
I
right?
like
It's
it.
the same reason why we overload our kids with a ton of homework. My child is starting middle school. It's his first week. I'm like, really? We really have this much homework already?
Yeah.
Like, you're not teaching kids a healthy balance of work and self care. Like,
Mm-mm.
but this is the system in which we operate, right? And it's
Yeah.
the system that why I have a hashtag disruptors unite. In the words of Maya Angelou, we know what we when we know better, we do better, right?
Yes.
Guess
Yes.
what? We know better, but we're not doing better.
No. No. Something we there's a disconnect. We're stuck. We are we know what needs to change, I think. At least a lot of us do. But for some reason it's not translating into the way that we teach our kids and in the way that our schools function. And those, those requirements for academics are not set up by the teachers. They're probably not even set up by the principals, right? I mean, it's coming from,
No, it's set by the state. If you're a public school, it's the
yeah,
standards are set by the state.
yeah,
The curriculum is adopted by the state and then adopted by the district. Teachers don't have any. I mean, they have committees and things. Um, and I love this idea when I hear, well, schools just aren't like they were when I was a kid. Yeah, no kidding. Like, kids are doing in 6th grade what I might have done in 9th grade. But even in 9th grade, like, I learned how to type on a typewriter, Beth. I'm not lying to you. Like, I promise you, I graduated in the mid 90s. I didn't have a computer. I typed on a typewriter. I didn't have an email address till mid college. Like, no, it's not the same because our kids are so much more advanced than
Ugh,
I was in their learning and their. I had a card catalog. Like, we have to quit saying, like, why are they teaching math different?
mhm, mhm,
Because we know better.
mhm.
Like, we know better, right? And even beyond the academics, why are we focusing on the social emotional health of our kids? I don't even like the word learning. I call it social emotional health because we know better,
Yeah, yeah,
right? The
yeah.
science has changed.
Yes, the science has changed, and I also think the times have changed. The kids seem to really I don't know what it is, but they're more aware, they're more perceptive, they're
Absolutely.
more sensitive, they seem to be absorbing more. They're also just exposed to way more than we were. I mean, with the media, social media, all these things, the phone in their pocket. I mean, they are dealing with a constant barrage of information, negative information, and that that just sets your nervous system on high alert. Hypervigilance is real. It sets you up for high alert, and when you're on high alert all the time and you're hyper aroused because of many different factors, it makes it very difficult to function and to learn and to regulate your emotions and to make good choices um, and to discern between what's best and what's not and all that stuff. I also think that, our kids seem much more mature than they actually are developmentally. Because they're exposed to things so much earlier, it's really easy for parents and teachers to expect a lot more, and unfortunately the brain is not fully developed until about 26, 27, somewhere in there, right? And we as the adults need to be the prefrontal cortex of the brain until the child gets to that point, so that they literally are not able to make the best decisions for themselves. They need us to guide them, even if they get mad and throw a fight and freak out. That's okay. You can't be afraid of those reactions. You need to be the part of the brain that is rational for them until their until their rational brain is fully functioning. And it's just not the it's just not fully functioning till they're much older than we thought. So that's another thing that has changed. I think we expect a lot from children, that they're really just not ready to handle.
Well, and I think what I've also learned, and I've seen it happen in districts, so in districts happening all over the country, is When demographics shift, people don't make any shift in their mind, right?
Mm.
And matter of fact, when I first became a principal, we started using the leader in me, the 7 habits of highly effective people. It was our grounding foundation. We could communicate with the same vocabulary. Everybody knew all of what it meant, and we empowered kids. We had a leadership day that was planned, ran, and implemented by kids. It was supported by adults. I mean, it was all kid focused and driven. And so I had NPR, the National Public Radio, did this whole story on us and our leadership, and then they produced the story, and it was actually a rebuttal to a legislator here in the state of Tennessee who was fighting against anything that had to do with social emotional learning. This was many years ago,
Oh.
because she said that that should be learned in church and at home.
Mm.
And I thought, like, really? Like that's really what we're thinking right now. And so I mean, I think there's so much. You're right. So much has changed,
Mhm.
and it's not all bad, right?
Mm-mm.
I
Mm-mm.
think I met with he is my cousin's son last night. It was his 21st birthday. He lives in Georgia, and I was just talking to him, and I was talking to him, and he was just expressing his thoughts and feelings and all this, and he's about to graduate college, and I thought, man, you are so much more social aware than I ever would have been. Like, seriously.
Yeah.
So much more social aware,
Yeah.
tapped into, like, human rights and
Mhm.
understanding what basic human rights look like, and how that what we're doing is not working. And it was like, I literally was like, What am I gonna take in my first class in college? Or what am I gonna do with my life?" And this guy is brilliant, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, "I just don't feel like I'm growing up fast." What? Dude, you are, like, brilliant. And I think we have to pause the button a little bit.
Mhm.
And there is massive impact of a lot of things that are happening, social media being one
Yeah.
of them. And parents have you're right, parents have to be the adult,
Mhm.
and have to know. I know, as a parent, my son does have a cell phone. He does not have social media, and whether you call it intrusive or whatever, we use a monitoring. He knows it. I'm sure he can get around it if he wants. That's fine. But I also have conversations about the text change between some of his fellow middle schoolers.
Mhm.
I'm not shaming him. I'm like, so what are your thoughts about that? Right?
Mhm.
Like, how are you going to respond? Well, like, it's a conversation tool for me to prepare him for life.
Right.
I don't want to shelter him from anything, because that's not how life works. We
Yeah.
talk through it. When he has an issue at school, we talk through how you're going to handle it. But
Yeah.
every parent doesn't have the privilege or the capacity to do that. And
Right.
I don't expect every parent to do what I do, because every parent isn't in the situation and given the privilege that I have.
True. And I think that brings us to the idea or the concept of intergenerational trauma, right? Is that a lot of times what we don't might not see in those parents that you were talking about earlier, when you were saying you try to give the same respect and understanding and compassion to the parents that you do your students. And I think what we often maybe are not aware of or don't realize is that this trauma is intergenerational. It gets passed down from generation to generation. And there's research and actually like solid research to back this up. And it's even past, they're finding now and doing more research, and more research is needed, but they're finding that even in your genes, it changes the gene expression. And I won't get into it 'cause it's very technical, but just knowing that, that the trauma that our parents experienced have changed their brain, right? It changed how they saw the world. And then they raised us from that perspective. And that impacted our lives and the way we saw the world and the way we reacted. So, these things that happened in the past, they matter today. You know, People that were severely traumatized in previous generations have unknowingly and unintentionally passed that down to their children and their offspring. And that's, I think, kind of part of the problem that we're seeing now with this, with everybody all the behavior problems that we're seeing is because it keeps getting sort of passed down and passed down and passed down, and nobody's addressing it. It's not getting processed. We need to break that cycle, and the only way to break that cycle is by doing something differently, not parenting the way our parents parented us, not just doing it because this is the way I was raised or it worked for me, I turned out fine, as you're drinking 12 beers a night and
Right.
screaming at your kids and, whatever it is you're coping with, gambling and sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever. Um, you know, we can do better. We can do better. We can break those cycles. We can be trust based and trust focused with our children, and we can prevent that trauma from being passed down to their children. So,
And I think too, it goes even deeper, right? We have to trace
mm, yeah,
systematic trauma, historical trauma. We
yeah,
can't just say that what's happened in the past isn't isolated to a family unit. We gotta look internally at what has happened across historical time and say this has had an impact. Interesting enough, her, Ingrid Cochran. She's the CEO of Paces. She was on this podcast. I think she was like the third guest. And she got into this work because she was concerned about black parenting. And she was going to come in to help black parents parent better. And as she entered the field, she realized this isn't a black parent issue. This is a systematic issue that has been happening to black families since before slavery. And as it has as these intergenerational transmission of this trauma, historical trauma, is passed down, these things are systematically driven, right?
yeah,
And that's where this idea that we have to see this and know better and do better.
yeah,
It's deep, it's hard to process, it's hard to think about what does that have to do with me? And I think what it has to do with us is first we have to identify it,
hmm
we have to validate it,
hmm
then we have to figure out how to change it.
yeah,
And sometimes that change means we can't continue to do what we've always done,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It can't be that way. The
yeah,
disproportionality of children of color in schools, it's still there. It still exists. It's repulsive, right? These things impact our systems, and yet we still want to look in individuals as it's your choice, you're doing it right. And I say we, not you and I, but a lot of schools still have that mentality like you need to fix this at home.
yeah.
Well, let's
Oh,
again.
yeah, it's much bigger. It's
Oh yeah.
much bigger than just a family unit, and I'm glad that you pointed that out. Yes, um, I think that what everything you're saying is spot on. There's so much invisible pain that has taken place throughout history that nobody's acknowledged. That nobody, you're not even aware of it. It's like even as a woman, I'm still just trying to uncover how. How things have affected me and my choices and the place I am in life and all of those things. Like I'm still just trying to process all that and so that I can pass down better skills to my daughter. But I think, the power we have is within ourselves to look and to see and to try and uncover some of that painful stuff, as scary as it might be. The best thing that you can ever do for yourself and your children or your students is take a look at you and any unprocessed pain and trauma or loss that you have, and do the work that you need to do. It won't be easy, and it does take an incredible amount of strength, but in the long run, it's going to be what's best for your children and for your students. And yeah, so I do that work. Like I'm a therapist, I go to therapy all the time.
Mhm, mhm,
I've been in therapy many times.
mhm,
I've taken antidepressants when I need to take them.
mhm,
I've struggled with anxiety since I was a child.
mhm,
I've had episodes of depression. Like this is the human condition.
mhm,
And the more that we can talk about it and share that so that people don't feel so like different and weird when they
mhm.
hear that somebody else, because for years I thought, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? It's only since COVID that this conversation has become so
It's true.
outed
Mhm,
that I'm starting to finally be like, oh, everybody's going through this, like at
mhm.
different times, maybe not simultaneously, but at some point in your life, you are going to struggle with these mental health issues. It's pretty much a given. And if we can normalize that for people, and now I'm off on a tangent, but we have to make it okay to be messed up sometimes,
Yeah.
and to screw up, make mistakes, and have the ability to say, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one who feels this way. I'm not the only one who's having obsessive thoughts. I'm not the only one who's having intrusive, scary thoughts as a new mom.
Mhm.
That's very common experience, probably with foster moms and adoptive moms as well. Um, it's a natural thing that our brain is doing. There's nothing wrong with any of us. It's human.
It's interesting because when we were foster family, we had friends who had already gone through adoption. We had friends that were foster. We would all get together, and it was like just laying out all of the dirty laundry, and it felt so good. Like
Yeah.
when this happens, do you just feel so overwhelmed? And like they're like, absolutely. Like one of our friends, like I literally just had to like go in the backyard in the rain and just walk around, like. And again, the human connection through the process of healing, and that's what it is, right? Is the imperative piece of the puzzle that we have to continue to validate, which is why this podcast exists, right?
Yeah.
So, as educators, we have immense power and influence on literally generations of children that simply by shifting our paradigm, by shifting how we see situations and how we look at individual kids, not as a part of a massive group, but an individual, can change the trajectory of literally a generation of our kids. It can change that much.
Yeah.
Then you bring in the parenting piece and the amount of support we can continue to provide, unshamed, unapologetic support of authentic, true support
Yeah.
can also, right? And I'm not saying we're saving a generation because I'm not. I don't want this idea of a
That's too
savior
big.
complex. Like, but it simply is just showing up and being human for other humans,
Yeah.
pausing when we need to, holding space for kids when we need to, holding space for parents. I think I told you when we talked last time, there was a time I had a parent, he was on fire angry. He told me what he was going to do to me, how he was going to do it. It was in the front office. I brought him in my office. All I did was listen, and he let it all out.
Mm,
And then he came up, and all I could do was hug the grown man.
mm.
And he cried, and he cried, and he cried. And as he walked out, my secretary said, "What are you doing to people in there? They're coming out like crying and like thinking." And I'm like, I literally don't do anything except listen and validate. Like
Yeah.
that is it. And a
Yeah.
lot of times that's all this work takes. So Beth, I told you this time was going to go by really, really.
I did. It flew.
So how can people, well, first of all, you've got to, we may have to go over time. That's fine. You've got to talk about your book. We didn't even get
Oh,
there,
yeah. Didn't even
right?
get there.
We
Yeah.
didn't get to that. Talk
Um,
about
be
your book and why you wrote it and why it's important.
Yeah, so this is a little bit like a side passion thing of mine. When I worked with kinship families, also known as grand families or grandparents raising grandchildren, I just felt such a connection and such like a just really wanted to be a resource and support for them. I was inspired to write a children's book because I just couldn't find one. You when you see a need, sometimes you can meet it, and that's how I felt. Like I have to write this book myself if it doesn't exist. So I wrote a grand family for Sullivan, and it's a story about a little koala bear, if you can see, who suddenly has to live with his grandmother because his parents were unable to keep him safe. And he has lots of questions and worries and big fears and big emotions and anger and outbursts. And all along the way, grandma stays by his side and is patient and helps him through it. And he meets a friend who helps him develop some coping skills. And the book, what I love about it the most, and this might seem odd, but it doesn't have a happy ending so much as it has. I mean, it's sort of a happy-ish, like to call it, a happy-ish ending where Grandma and Sullivan feel really connected and supported by one another. But it doesn't end with like, and then he went home to his mom and dad, and everybody lived happily ever after. It leaves the book ends with Sullivan feeling uncertain and grandma feeling uncertain, and them sharing their feelings about that they wish they had more information, but they don't, but they'll be here for each other, and no matter what. And so I like that because I think that's more realistic and I think it will really resonate with families. And I know it has. It's been out since 2019 and the best part about publishing a book is getting the messages from the grandparents telling me the impact that it had on their children. And I
Mm.
have over 120 five-star reviews on Amazon that and with like little notes from people who have experienced just such a transformation with their grandchildren after reading the story to them, because it gives the language and age appropriate, therapy approved,
Mhm.
therapist approved language that a lot of adults, it's hard. It's hard. If I wasn't a therapist, I still, when I have a issue come up with my daughter, and I've done this since she was born, first thing I do is I go to a children's book because sometimes I just don't have the words and I need someone else to give them to me. So this book is the words, and I think it's great for teachers to have a copy in their classrooms because inevitably there's going to be someone in your classroom who's being raised by a relative. Just given the world that we're living in, the opioid addiction and mental health problems, even deaths and incarceration. So this is a book for teachers to have available in their classroom to help their students not feel so alone, but also to build empathy for the students who come from more traditional families who don't maybe understand their friend Billy and why he's acting out all the time. This book will help build empathy for the other students who may not understand. So
Such an awesome little book. And for the
yeah,
listeners who are listening live, there is a link that you can click. All you have to do is put your name and email address. You can, if you want to sign up for Best Newsletter, I highly recommend. It's a monthly newsletter.
yeah.
Put it in there. She's going to give one listener a copy of her book. I will tell you, there's only a couple people who filled it out. I just checked it. So high probability right now, if you get your information, your name, and your email address in there, that you have a high likelihood of getting the book right now. For the listeners on the podcast, if you review this episode and just tell us what you think, I will be sending Beth all of those reviews, and we will hunt you down. And if you email me and say, hey, or tweet it or put it on Facebook on the Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast, we will find you, and she will give one of those reviewers a book as well. So
Yeah.
Beth, if they want to find you on social media, where can they find you? If they obviously your website is right now on the screen, which is
Yeah.
BethTyson.com. But what about social media?
Oh, I'm very active in social media. So I'm on Facebook as Beth Tyson Trauma Consulting. I have a private Facebook group called Emotominds where I really share more skills and strategies and have built a community in there for you to ask questions about children that you're working with or raising when they come up. So it's a safe place. Safety is my number one priority of that group. I pay attention to every single person who comes in. I make sure they fill out the questions that are necessary in order to enter the group, and I always moderate the comments, and if anybody is in least bit inappropriate, they get sent out. Bye bye. I got no time for that. I'm also very active on LinkedIn as well, and you can just find me Beth Tyson on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Yeah, I know how moderating a group is. Matter of fact,
Yeah.
I have a great team of moderators. So shout out to the Trauma Informed Educators Network group moderators. There's like 5 of us. And there's almost 30,000 people now. I'm pretty sure we're going to pass 30,000 in the next week.
Wow.
So it is hard. And I will tell you what I've learned about this work is sometimes trauma informed educators can be the hardest people on other people. And I'm like, no, don't we not? No. Yes, I understand that might not be a trauma informed practice, but at the end of the day, we're all on a journey. We're all learning together.
Hmm.
It's okay. It's okay if we're not all in the same spot.
Yeah.
And I want to also, if you want to follow me, of course, you can follow me on Principal List on both Instagram and Twitter. If you want to follow my personal page on Facebook, I guess you can. You're going to see like me going to you're going to love this. I actually got called out. I'm a season ticket holder of the Nashville Soccer Club, the professional soccer team. You all, this is really funny. If for any other reason to follow me on Facebook on my personal page, it's for this. So they shoot out T-shirts, right? Like in this little T-shirt thing, and our mascot is a coyote. So he's shooting the T-shirts, And he gets over to our section. My son was like, oh, he was so hyped, and I got hyped. And they took the t-shirt out of the little t-shirt shooter thing, and they handed it to a little boy, which was so sweet. They took a picture of the coyote giving this t-shirt to this little boy. And who is in the background with his hand on his hip and a grouchy look on his face? This guy, you all, this guy. They Timpo, the mascot on Twitter, called me out. They zoomed in on my picture with my hand on my hip, and they said, this guy was upset about not getting a t-shirt. Sorry, bud. You all. Yes, it would be considered public shaming, and yet it was the greatest thing that has happened to me in so long. It was amazing. So that's what you're going to get if you follow me. Also, please follow Trauma Informed Educators Network, the page. Also, join the group if you haven't joined the group. And lastly, if you haven't liked the Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast, you can also like that page on Facebook. Please continue to use Disruptors Unite. This is about disrupting archaic systems that we know are not working, but we continue to do because it's what we've always done. And then one more little shout out. Don't forget, here in September, I can't even believe I'm speaking these words into the world, but I'll be traveling to New Zealand, and I'll be speaking in 4 different cities. And it's funny because I get to one, and I in the intro, I think I said Rotoru, and I think it's I don't even know how to say it. Rotor. I don't know. Nonetheless, if you're in New Zealand, I hope you come see me in September. And if you're in Australia, I will be at the Trauma Aware Schools Conference in Brisbane on September 10th and 11th. Previous guest on this show, Dr. Lori Desautel, will be speaking on the 11th. I'll be opening the conference on the 10th. If you're there and you see us, please say hello to me. Introduce yourself. I love putting faces to listeners. It's just something I really enjoy doing. I'm just excited. I'm just excited. I get to go and do something amazing and inspire people around the world. Nonetheless, I just want to leave you with one thing. I'm not telling people to wash their hands anymore, although please continue to wash your hands. I guess I just did. But what I want you to continue to ask yourself is I want you to move away from what's happened to you, and I want you to start asking yourself, what is right with you? So from now on, that's what you're going to hear. So what's right with you? Have a good night.
Thank you.
All right. To the listeners that are still on here, thank you all for tuning in. Much appreciated of the live interactions. Thank you for the comments and all of the sharing and all of you who came to join us tonight. I will not be here next week. I probably won't even be here till it's going to be like mid-September. So if you haven't listened to the previous episodes, please do. There are 68 of them that you can go through if you haven't listened to all of them. So thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it. Beth, thank you for being with us. We appreciate your expertise and sharing all of your knowledge. And don't forget to fill out the form if you want to try to get a copy of her book. She might even sign it. Who knows? So
absolutely.
There you go. All right, guys. Thank you. And I'll see you when I see you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.